Hello, my beautiful souls. Welcome to Spiritual Bloom, where we bloom within our consciousness, with your spiritual guide and Twinflame coach Neha. In today's episode, we will be understanding why compassion and kindness is so important in spirituality and also in your twin journey. So, there is a question that sits at the heart of every spiritual person and tradition, that what does it truly mean to awaken? Or is spirituality about rituals, meditation, prayer, sacred texts, enlightenment, ascension, or discipline? Or it is ultimately about how we treat one another. Across cultures, religion, philosophies, and mystical tradition, one truth appears again and again. A spiritual life without compassion becomes empty performance. Let me repeat that again. A spiritual life or ascension without compassion becomes empty performance. Kindness is not a side effect of spirituality. It is one of the clearest signs. A person, for example, can memorize scriptures, meditate for hours, master rituals, or speak beautifully about higher consciousness. But if they cannot show empathy, patience, mercy, or love towards other person or animals, something essential is missing in their life and most importantly in their soul. Because spirituality is not just about transcending the self, it is also about softening the self. And compassion is often the evidence that transformation is real. So now let's understand what compassion is really. Everybody talks about being kind, about being compassionate. Be compassionate, be a compassionate human. Be this, be that, be kind to animals. But do we really know what compassion is? Let me tell you. Compassion is more than just being nice. And kindness is more than just being polite. Because real compassion is the ability to recognize suffering, both in ourselves and in others as well, and respond with care instead of indifference or being judgmental. It's choosing understanding over judgment, patience over aggression, mercy over superiority, connection over ego. Compassion does not mean that you are weak. It does not mean allowing abuse. And it also does not mean that you lack boundaries. True compassion can be gentle, but it can also be firm. Sometimes compassion comforts, it tells the truth, it forgives, it walks away peacefully. But at its core, compassion recognizes shared humanity. It says, I see your pain because I too know pain. Or, I see your pain because I too have been through that pain. And spirituality begins to deepen the moment we stop seeing ourselves as isolated individuals and start recognizing the interconnectedness of all life. So, why every major spiritual tradition emphasizes compassion? Let's understand this through the nature in every religion. Compassion is a sacred thing. So in Buddhism, it has been said that compassion is central to awakening. Siddhartha Gautam taught that suffering is universal. Liberation comes not only through wisdom, but through compassion for all beings. The Bodhisattva ideal is specially powerful, a being who postpones personal enlightenment in order to help others awaken. It suggests that the highest spiritual state is not isolation from humanity, but service to humanity. And they consider that service to humanity is the highest form of awakening. Similarly, in Christianity, if you have watched movies on Jesus Christ, or if you really are a Christian, you have read the Bible properly, it has been emphasized over and over again the words like love, mercy, forgiveness, and compassion, like love your neighbor as yourself. Blessed are the merciful. So the message is clear. that spiritual devotion without compassion is incomplete. Similarly, in Hinduism, compassion is connected to dharma, karma, and the recognition of the divine in all beings. Many Hindu teachings suggest that harming others is ultimately harming oneself because all life is interconnected through the same universal consciousness, and that consciousness is dharma and karma. Similarly, in Islam, mercy is foundational. One of the most repeated descriptions of God in the Quran is the most compassionate and the most merciful. Compassion towards the poor, vulnerable, stranger, and even animals is deeply emphasized. In Sikhism, service, equality, and kindness are spiritual duties. Feeding the hungry, defending the oppressed, and treating others with dignity are not separate from spirituality, they are expressions of it. So, in indigenous and mystical traditions also, it teaches that life exists in sacred relationship and humans are not above creation but a part of it. That's why I always tell you that we humans are part of this Mother Earth, and because of your ascension, because of your healing, you have the capability and the power of raising the vibration of this earth. And compassion and kindness is a part of that healing which is responsible for raising the vibration and bringing this Mother Earth into a higher frequency. So now let's understand, we have talked about compassion. Let us understand that what is the connection between ego and lack of compassion, right? We see that some people, they lack compassion, they are not kind as they should be. So why do people become cruel? Why do judgment, arrogance, hatred and indifference appear so easily? Because the ego fears separation. The ego constantly compares. I am better. The word I is about ego. It's always about themselves. I am better. I deserve more. They deserve less. I must win. I must dominate. So here the word is what? I. So I brings what? It's ego. So when you are blinded by ego, you will never understand the meaning of being or having a compassionate heart. Because compassion threatens the ego and compassion dissolves separation. When you deeply empathize someone, it becomes harder to dehumanize them, harder to hate them, harder to ignore suffering. That is why authentic spirituality often makes people soft, not weaker, but soft in heart. The spiritually mature person, if you have come across any who have ascended, who are in the healing journey, everybody is carrying an invisible pain. Everyone is fighting some internal battles which we have no knowledge about, we are not aware about. Everyone longs to be seen, valued, loved and safe. And once you truly understand that, cruelty becomes harder to justify. That's why many people find it easier to be cruel than to have compassion. Because here, what destroys is the ego. Being self-centered, just understanding their part of the story and not understanding the other person's story is what ego is all about. And when ego wins, compassion and kindness disappears. That's why many people are rich in material life, but when it comes to richness of kindness and being compassionate, that is where the ego wins. So now many of you must be wondering that how can compassion be a part of healing, or how can compassion raise the vibration of the earth? People who are deeply wounded often wound others. Remember that. People who are deeply wounded often wound others. Pain that is ignored tends to spread like a disease. That is why spiritual growth is not merely intellectual. It is not just about being intellectual. It is emotional and relational too. A spiritually evolving person gradually becomes less reactive, less hateful, and less consumed by resentment. Not because their life becomes easy. They still go through many battles that many people are not aware about. But they become less reactive, less hateful, and less consumed by resentment because awareness grows. They become more aware with time. As the healing intensifies, they become more aware. And healing creates space between pain and response. Without compassion, spirituality can become simply an escapism. Some people, they use spirituality to avoid emotions, avoid accountability, or feel morally superior. But genuine spiritual growth usually produces humility. That's why we always talk about spiritual ego, isn't it? Once a person understands that he is awakened or she is awakened and starts the healing process and has reached a phase of ascension where they are aware, they're intellectually smart, and sometimes materially, they are blessed with many things, success. So at that moment, they start having this ego. That is called the spiritual ego, where they feel that I am better than the other person because the other person is not awake and not aware, whereas I am awake and aware. So that is very dangerous. When you reach a point in your ascension and you know that you have ascended, you have come a long way, but at that moment, instead of being more compassionate and being humble, you start having this spiritual ego. So you should check on it when you start your healing process or reach a certain kind of ascension. So compassion is a part of the healing journey. And the word kindness may seem very small, especially in today's world. It is a gentle word, a moment of listening, a gesture of patience, or an act of generosity. But spiritually, small act matters immensely. Why? Because kindness interrupts suffering, and suffering spreads quickly. One harsh interaction can affect someone's entire day, and one compassionate interaction can restore hope. That is the difference. One harsh interaction can affect someone's entire day. It can affect them mentally, physically, whereas one compassionate interaction can restore hope and make that person feel happy. But most people, they underestimate how deeply human beings affect one another energetically and emotionally. That's why kindness has a spiritual power, because what you give is what you get in return. And when you give, you have to give without any expectations. It's not that you are doing some charity work or you are being compassionate and you are showing 100 people that I am doing this, this, and this. That is not act of charity. That is not act of kindness. That is an act of show off for social media. So you need to decide whether you are really doing a spiritual work by helping people or you are doing a work to show the social media. If you are doing a work to show the social media, that is not a spiritual work. I'm so sorry. And that again comes from your spiritual ego, that I have ascended so much. I am successful. I'm capable of feeding this much people. So let's not why show it in social media, so that people will applaud for me that I have reached this much height of success in my life. That is absolutely wrong. A true compassion, a true leader comes from being compassionate and kind behind the curtains, and not speaking it or showing it off in loudspeakers that I have done this for them or I have done that for them. That's why it's very important to balance your ascension and healing process, and also check yourself whether you have come into any kind of spiritual ego or not. Spiritually speaking, kindness creates a ripple effect. And unlike material success, compassion leaves impact that often outlives us. People may forget what someone has achieved, but they rarely forget how someone made them feel. That's why if you have noticed that when people they die, they don't take their material wealth along with them. They leave a legacy, and that legacy is not just money, building, or a book that they have written. Legacy is not just material things. Legacy is how much respect you have achieved in your lifetime, in that particular society, in that particular family, or where you were working. That is the legacy. Usually people, they confuse, they think that legacy is just having a certain amount of, money, wealth, success, status. But you are not carrying that to your grave. What you are carrying to your grave is the compassion and kindness which you showed earned you respect. So now it's for you to decide which one do you choose. Now here, lastly, I'd like to talk about compassion towards yourself also. And this is very important. Why? Because when you are not kind to yourself, when you are not compassionate towards yourself, you cannot expect yourself to be kind to others. And this is an important truth in spirituality. You cannot sustainably give compassion to others while constantly hating yourself, criticizing yourself, thinking yourself as, someone who's very low, who's got nothing to do in life. Having self-compassion is not selfishness, it's an act of self-love. It is recognizing your humanity. Until and unless you don't recognize your humanity, your self-compassion, you can never show that compassion to the outside world. Many people are deeply cruel to themselves internally because they carry shame, guilt, perfectionism, and relentless self-judgment. They are so judgmental about themselves that I am a failure, I am this, I am that, I couldn't perform this. So before being kind to someone else, you have to remember to be kind to yourself, especially if you are in any kind of spiritual journey, because these spiritual journeys are very difficult and very painful. It has suffering. So in that suffering, you cannot expect the world to be kind to yourself, but at least you can expect and hope to be kind to yourself first. Because spirituality teaches that transformation does not grow well in hatred. You cannot hate yourself and expect yourself to heal and ascend. That will never happen. First you have to be kind to yourself. That's why I've always told you, you have to wear your oxygen mask first before helping others. It creates a ripple effect. If you don't wear your oxygen mask properly, how will you breathe and how will you help the other person? You have to breathe properly. In the same way, you have to understand yourself. You have to be compassionate towards yourself. Then only you can be compassionate to others and transform and ascend in this journey. Growth needs honesty, and you have to be honest to yourself. Growth needs accountability, and you have to be accountable to yourself. But it also needs mercy, meaning you have to be kind to yourself. Now, being kind to yourself means what? It means that allowing mistakes without defining yourself by them. Recognizing that healing takes time and not forcing it or judging yourself for being a certain way. Speaking to yourself with dignity and not putting yourself down. Accepting that imperfection is a part of human's life. You are not perfect, nobody is. So ironically, people who learn self-compassion often become more compassionate towards others because they stop projecting their own pain outward. So that is why being kind to yourself, being self-compassionate is so important, because the true healing starts when you focus on yourself and apply all these things on yourself. Because until and unless you don't apply these things to yourself, you will never be able to reflect that outside. So now, let me tell you that, being compassionate does not mean accepting everything, okay? This is a major misconception that people have nowadays. And this is very important. Because compassion is not passive submission. It is not a passive submission. Many people understand or misunderstand spirituality as endless tolerance of harmful behavior. That is wrong. But it is a healthy compassion includes what? It includes wisdom and boundaries. You have the knowledge, therefore you create healthy boundaries. But when you don't have the wisdom, you don't create healthy boundaries and you let people treat you in whatever way they want to, just because you are compassionate. Now that is wrong. And by this I mean that you can love someone and still say no. If they are crossing their line, if they are telling you to do something which you are not supposed to do or you don't want to do, and saying no is perfectly fine. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself, protect your peace. But at the same time, you forgive the other person. You can understand someone's pain without allowing them to abuse you. Meaning, you understand the other person's pain, you understand what they are going through, but at the same time, you will not allow the other person to abuse you. Because spiritual compassion is not enabling destruction. It is responding consciously rather than reactively. Sometimes the most compassionate thing is honesty. Sometimes it's distance, and sometimes it is accountability. Kindness without wisdom becomes self-destruction. Without boundaries, it becomes self-destruction. And wisdom without kindness becomes coldness. And you require both. You need to have kindness as well as you need to have wisdom. Without wisdom, you cannot draw boundaries. Without knowledge, you cannot draw boundaries. You have to be kind, but there is a certain limit to it. Right? Like we say, right? Excess of anything is bad for health. Excessive eating is bad for health. In the same way, too much kindness, too much compassion is also bad for your health, for your mental health especially. Because the other person will not understand when they are crossing the line and they'll start abusing you mentally. So it's very necessary to have kindness as well as the knowledge that where to draw the line. So now let's understand that why the world desperately needs compassion. We are at a time where we have seen war is going on. We have seen pandemic, many people they lost their life. Yet people are becoming meaner day by day instead of being kinder. Why is it so? Because modern society often rewards speed, competition, image, outrage, and self-interest. People are increasingly isolated despite being digitally connected. Have you noticed that? We are digitally connected, but within their heart, many people are isolated. Loneliness is rising, anxiety is rising, division is rising, people are going through depression. Have you ever heard about people having depression or anxiety when this digital world was not there? I don't think so. Why? Because they were connected. They were connected physically. Even if there was a distance, they took that much of effort to connect to each other. Nowadays, people are digitally connected, but they don't have that effort. They don't want to put in any kind of effort. Now here I don't mean effort to stay connected just with lovers. I am also including family members, friends. Nobody wants to put in an effort. Everyone is so busy. Competition, image, status, money. Just press the button once and you can call, you can send a text, you can send a voicemail, you can, video call. Yet people are isolated, they are lonely, they are depressed. Why? Because efforts are missing. People have become egotistical, running behind money, running behind status. They've forgotten that the only reason for their loneliness and depression is nothing else but they lack that connection. They lack the connection with their friends and families. That's why they are so isolated and alone. In such a world, what happens? Compassion becomes revolutionary. Because compassion slows down enough to remember each other's humanity, and that is what it is happening. It reminds us that behind every opinion is a person. Behind every anger is often a pain. Behind every stranger is a life as complex as our own. Spirituality asks us to resist to become emotionally numb, not to abandon discernment. Here the important thing is not to abandon discernment. You should have discernment, but to remain human in a world that often encourages detachment. People, they like to detach nowadays. It has become a trend. Oh, detachment. I'll be detached. I'll show my ego. But they don't have this discernment. Why are you detaching? For what joy? You are detaching from ego, or you are detaching because you really require detachment in your life. So that discernment is missing. Compassion does not solve every problem. I'm not talking here about compassion today because I globally want to bring some changes. Of course I want to, but the understanding has to be that why compassion is required in today's world. It cannot solve every problem. It cannot solve a war. It cannot solve the pandemic. But without compassion, even solutions become dangerous. Technology without compassion can become exploitation. Power without compassion becomes oppression. And knowledge, especially, without compassion becomes arrogance. And spirituality without compassion becomes hypocrisy. That's why people, they go through spiritual ego. They think that they know too much. They are not grounded. They are not humble. Though life has put them through so much of ups and downs, still they don't understand, or they don't want to understand. So, at its deepest level, it is not merely about escaping suffering or achieving enlightenment. It is about becoming more awake to life, more awake to understanding, and awake to the consequences of our actions, awake to love. Compassion and kindness, it matters in spirituality because they dissolve the illusion of separateness. They remind us that every human being carries invisible struggle, fears, hopes, and wounds. Nobody is perfect. They transform spirituality from theory into lived reality. Anyone can speak about spirituality, but compassion reveals whether spirituality has truly entered their heart. It reveals whether they have really done their healing work. And the real test is not how spiritual we appear. No matter I'm sitting here and giving you lectures, that does not mean that I'm highly spiritual. How will you know? The real test. The real test is how gently we hold the life of others while we are here. Meaning, even if you are going through suffering in your life, how gentle you are to people around you, how kind you are to people and animals and environment around you, how understanding you are. That will define how much you have ascended, how much healing work you have done. And that is the real test. Just by talking, giving lectures, or telling people that you are spiritual, you are kind, you are compassionate, it has no work. You know, any kind of talk without action is zero. That is what I believe. So to really come into alignment, just remember that being compassionate and kind is also a part of spirituality. And most importantly, if you are in a healing journey, it is a part of your healing. The more compassionate, the more grounded, the more humble, the more things are going to fall for you. The more arrogant, the more egotistical, the more oversmart ones, they will show off to a certain time, but that will collapse. It's not for the long haul. So always remember that compassion and kindness, you have to carry it forward till you are here. It's not a showcase, especially if you are in a healing journey. So I hope you like this episode on compassion in spirituality. If you really like this episode, like, share and subscribe. For any kind of personal guidance, you can WhatsApp or email me. My contact details have been given in the description box and mentioned in the video as well. I provide a 10 to 15 minutes demo before booking any kind of sessions. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you again in another episode.